I wonder if you could give us your assessment of the status of the arts at Ohio State.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, part of the reason I was interested in taking this job was that I feel that we're already doing a lot of things really well, and the story of the arts simply hasn't been told. It hasn't been lifted up into visibility. So I see a lot of my charge being to do that. First of all, I think there's a really strong history to the arts here at Ohio State, whether we're talking about alumni and faculty in the Department of Dance from Diane McIntyre to B.B. Miller, the same in the Department of Art with, say, Roy Lichtenstein or Ann Hamilton. And I could continue with the other arts departments, or whether we're looking at the current moment. For example, 2 of 63 artists selected for the Whitney Biennial were from our Department of Art.
From the heart of The Ohio State University on the Oval, this is Voices of Excellence from the College of Arts and Sciences, with your host, David Staley. Voices focuses on the innovative work of arts and sciences faculty and staff, with departments as wide-ranging as art, astronomy, chemistry and biochemistry, physics, emergent materials, and mathematics and languages, among many others. The college always has something exciting happening. Join us to find out what's new now.
I'm delighted to be joined today by Lisa Florman, Professor of the History of Art and Vice Provost for the Arts at The Ohio State University. Her primary research interests are in modernism, the history of art history, and, above all, the intersection of the two. Dr. Florman, welcome to Voices.
Thanks for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm delighted you're here, and I especially want to learn more about your role as Vice Provost for the Arts. Now, this is a relatively new position. We've not had anything like this before at Ohio State, right?
Right. It's been in place about 2 years now, 2 years in September. And the position's relatively rare around the country. I know of
Is that so?
12 other schools with vice provosts for the arts. Most of them are privates: Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT, Emory, Vanderbilt, Duke.
Why is this? Why would it be so rare?
It's a very good question. I think in some sense it's a fate that befalls the arts in general, that they are conceived of as a luxury in many places, often the first thing to be cut. But I think there are an increasing number of universities adding this position, and I don't know the exact reasons why, but my sense is that those are places that recognize the value that the arts bring to universities for a whole range of reasons that we might talk about. Community engagement is certainly important to that, but I also think there are curricular and kind of more academic reasons for that. In a world that is increasingly dominated by information, I think many schools are starting to recognize that the arts offer space for a kind of thinking that's different and that really needs to be emphasized.
What are your responsibilities in this role? What's your remit?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, I'm charged with integrating the arts units here on campus with one another and with other units across the university, including, for example, the Wexner Medical Center and, kind of interestingly, agriculture and the Sustainability Institute and places like that. We've got some interesting projects going there. I am increasingly sort of interested in thinking about how the arts can be used to engage more effectively and meaningfully with communities here in Columbus and across the state. And eventually, I hope to extend my initiatives into curricular aspects through some sort of incentive program that will encourage faculty to build some form of making into their courses. I've come to believe that our students tend to live happily inside their zones of comfort, unwilling to risk failure. And I think it would be really salutary to have them experience opportunities where they're being asked to create within a certain set of constraints risking failure, but then learning from that failure. And I think there are all sorts of good effects that might ensue from that. Resiliency, creativity, obviously. Empathy as well, perhaps.
Making across the curriculum. Have I just coined something?
Ooh, I like that. Yes, maybe so. Yeah. And I think there are all sorts of intelligences, visual, kinesthetic, oral, that can be lifted up, put to use, and that I tend to worry in the modern world are becoming sidelined, even as they are becoming, as sort of images and sound and movement are becoming sort of more ubiquitous, I guess I would say.
So when you're talking about making, or if we've coined this, making across the curriculum, you're talking about in disciplines where making is maybe not the typical form, like making in, I don't know, biology or in history or something like that, right?
Right. I mean, it seems to me that the best scholars are typically ones who are either looking to other disciplines for inspiration or are thinking, now this may be part of my prejudice as a historian, but thinking about how innovation has happened in the past. And I think one of the places where you see that most clearly is in the arts. So I think there are all sorts of kind of historical lessons to be learned from the arts. But if we're actually talking then about the students making something, they're effectively being put in the position of an artist to think differently about the project confronting them. And again, I think it's that thinking differently that we typically don't ask our students to do. So I'm interested, again, this is a ways down the line. I don't have any courses in the pipeline yet, but I'm increasingly interested in thinking about what that might look like and putting faculty members in conversation with one another to think about what that might look like. Again, I don't have the answers here. It's got to be a bottom-up enterprise or it won't work. But
it's a risk for us, too. As someone who's done some making in history and have the funny looks from my colleagues, it's risky for us too, I would think.
That's right. And I suppose even we have to be prepared to confront failure as long as we're also prepared to learn from that and make changes and move on.
You had talked about integrating units, for instance, both the arts but also outside the arts. How are you accomplishing that?
Yeah, so one of the ways that I've started to address it is through a visiting artist program. So a call went out earlier spring semester for proposals from multiple departments, multiple units across campus to bring in visiting artists. So the main demands I placed on that were that it be interdisciplinary. That is, there would be multiple hosts for these artists and that the artists would have to stay for an extended period of time so that they could engage with students as well as faculty, especially junior faculty. And we had, I would say, some really interesting proposals from, for example, Knowlton School of Architecture and the Department of Design and the Wexner Center for the Arts. That's one proposal. We had one from AAEP, so Arts Administration, Education and Policy, and African American Studies. I think there was another partner there. But what I'm really hoping we'll get next year, and I'm going to start beating bushes to this end, is to get one of the departments, for example, in the sciences, or maybe the medical center, to put in a proposal with an art department. And I'm really curious to see what the results will be.
It sounds almost like you're experimenting. Is that a fair observation?
I suppose you could say that. With any new position, such as mine, right, you are kind of making things up on the spot. Your charge is to stand up some new programs. Again, you have to be prepared that some of those things will work and some of them won't, and constantly assess to see what is working and what isn't and revise accordingly. But sure, I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation here, and I hope to be able to give the faculty, working with the colleges obviously, but the faculty the leeway to try something pretty bold and different and creative, but possibly it won't work.
You had talked about projects involving the medical center, agriculture. Can you tell us something about these projects?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things going on right now. I mean, in the simplest form with the medical center, as the new tower is going up, we're putting art into those spaces, including photography from all 88 counties around Ohio, and we're enlisting 4-H programs in our regional campuses and the art faculty there to help us realize that. The School of Music is also developing a kind of art therapy program, and they will have musicians in the hospital as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that shapes up. There's a really interesting project happening this summer. July 17th is the date for it, where we're restaging a performance that happened in Chillicothe. It was called Calling Hours, and it was about the closure of the Conesville coal power plant in Coshocton, which happened very quickly and put a lot of people out of work. And that power plant had really been kind of the economic engine of that area for many generations. And so a faculty member named Jeffrey Jacquet who works with the Sustainability Institute, and Max Woodworth, who's in geography, are holding a international conference this summer on global coal transitions. So there'll be a whole bunch of academics here on campus, but we're restaging this performance, which was written by Ann Cornell, who's the artistic director of the Palmarine Arts Center in Coshocton, and directed by Tom Dugdale, who's an associate professor here in the Theater, Film, and Media Arts Department. And it was set up to be a kind of memorial service, I guess you would say, for the power plant. There were actors who were voicing lines that the author Ann Cornell had culled from interviews she had done with local residents. So we'll be restaging that here. We're renting a bus and bringing all the actors up from Coshocton and community members too. And it'll be in the Wexner Center for the Arts on July 17th. And they will be inviting, I'm sure, state legislators and people from AEP. And I think hoping to open a dialogue about what happens to these communities when they transition, as they must, right, from coal plants to something else, right? So again, that's one of the ways in which the arts here are being used for community engagement purposes, but also academic ones to animate a conversation that might otherwise seem depersonalized and just factual in nature. I should also mention at the same time, there's going to be an exhibition at the Wexner Center for the Arts of photographs by Jonas Becker that are of these same sorts of things. So industrial sites that have been decommissioned. And interestingly, Becker prints those photographs using coal dust. So it is a nice confluence of events happening here.
Well, I almost feel like you've addressed this already, but I wonder if you could give us your impression or your assessment of the status of the arts at Ohio State. I mean, it's wonderful that we have a vice provost for the arts. Maybe that should signal something.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, part of the reason I was interested in taking this job was that I feel that we're already doing a lot of things really well, and the story of the arts simply hasn't been told. It hasn't been lifted up into visibility. So I see a lot of my charge being to do that, and I can talk a little later about a website we're building and so on and so forth. But first of all, I think there's a really strong history to the arts here at Ohio State, whether we're talking about alumni and faculty in the Department of Dance from Diane McIntyre to B.B. Miller, the same in the Department of Art with, say, Roy Lichtenstein or Ann Hamilton. And I could continue with the other arts departments, or whether we're looking at the current moment. And let me point out, for example, that 2 of 63 artists selected for the Whitney Biennial were from our Department of Art. So Carmen Winant and Dion Lee are in the current Whitney Biennial. We have 3 Guggenheim recipients in the current round. 7 Guggenheims were given to choreographers. 2 of them are here teaching at Ohio State right now.
Wow.
So Ryan Johnson and Abby Zbikowski received Guggenheim Awards, as did Gina Osterloh in the Department of Art. So I think, again, there's a lot happening. A lot is already going really, really well. And I think it's amplifying that. And then I'm convinced that with the new facilities that we have that are, I think, going to enable us to attract even stronger, higher caliber students and faculty, and the nice synergies that are emerging amongst the art departments. And again, I hope with the university at large that will just continue to grow.
Say a little bit more about the facilities, because it seems like we're completely transforming that side of campus.
Yeah, I think that's right. So typically that side of campus is referred to as the Arts District, and I'll come back to that because I'd like to replace that with another image I have. But
oh, okay.
First, let me speak a little bit to the new Timoshev building for the School of Music and the new building for the Theater, Film, Media Arts Department. I think those 2 buildings now finally give us facilities that are commensurate to the quality of the work being done there and our aspirations for those programs. I think they're fantastic spaces. I like the fact that they're contiguous with one another. I think that's going to increase the collaboration between those 2 units and among all the arts at Ohio State. So I'm super excited about that. Again, we often speak of the Arts District, and I think probably that name is here to stay, but I really prefer the image of a hub, the arts hub. When I think of the word district, I think of something that's self-contained. And again, I prefer the image of the hub with spokes that radiate out across campus and into the community. I think that's really what we're trying to establish here, as well as a place that members of the community will use to enter the university, right? With folks coming here to exhibitions, performances. Hopefully they'll stay a while longer and wander a little further into campus to see what we have going on. But I think, again, these new facilities are exciting. They're catalyzing collaborations between the units. We now have a single box office that serves the Department of Dance, Theater, Film, and Media Arts, and the School of Music. And probably there will be sharing of staff increasingly in the future. But the real upside of that is, I think, we're looking to have sort of joint productions and a kind of easy flow of students and faculty from one unit to the next where it's productive.
You began by saying that the position of Vice Provost for the Arts is relatively rare in higher education. How would you rate Ohio State's investment in the arts in comparison, say, to other institutions?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously don't have the kind of endowment that the Harvard, Yales, Stanfords do. But I think recently there has been a real commitment, an investment in the arts at a time when some other universities are pulling back from that. So this was a fact I did not know until about 6 months into my job, but most of my budget comes from the sale of the parking garages, which happened in 2012.
Yes.
So that money was mostly used, is still mostly being used to pay off a loan that we got to build the new buildings. But the remainder is the money I have to work on. I also have money for the arts that comes from ENGIE. But
energy company here on campus.
That's right. That's right. They give some money to the Wexner Center for the Arts and some to sponsor the performing arts and visiting artists programs that my office oversees. So I ask listeners, when they're cursing the amount they have to pay for the parking on campus, they at least take some comfort in the fact that it's going toward programs that will benefit our students and the arts in general across Ohio State.
Well, and you were talking about the spokes into the community.
Yeah.
So I asked you to sort of assess the status of the arts at Ohio State. How would you assess the arts in Columbus or Central Ohio?
Yeah, so I think it's a really exciting moment for the arts in the city of Columbus. There seems to be an awareness of their importance. So, for example, the city recently got money from the Mellon Foundation for their project Reimagining Columbus, thinking about what should be done now that the Christopher Columbus statue has been taken down from the State House. What do we want to replace it? There's been a survey, a sort of year-long project to think about public art in general across the city, and some interesting things coming out of that, sort of a clear preference for maybe non-permanent public art. So we're moving away from statues venerating great individuals toward thinking about community projects that may be temporary in nature but can do a certain work of community building, and then it's time to invent something else. So we also have some more permanent public artworks going up around the city. There's a sculpture by Janet Eckelman that has been gifted by a local developer to the Columbus Museum of Art, and it sits at the intersection of Gay and High Street. So all sorts of conversations going on. We have a Percent for Art program, for example, that has allowed us to commission a lot of public art here on campus. I'm also building an app that will hopefully raise that work to greater visibility as well, and that will be launched this summer. But there is a real interest now in the city in thinking about how, together with the university, we can develop a public art plan, we can evaluate that plan, and we can do things together. One of the things I'm also interested in is thinking about, along with the city, the infrastructure for artists here in Columbus. So we have a lot of students who graduate from our programs but often feel they need to go to New York or LA or wherever in order to make their careers. And some of that's fine and appropriate, but it would also be great if folks thought they could stay here in town. So actually, my office recently was awarded a $2 million grant from the Mellon Foundation. The lion's share of that money is intended to set up experiential learning, i.e. sort of paid internship opportunities for our students. So how it will work is that the first semester that they're in the program, the students will spend time at the Urban Art Space downtown, this 10,000 square foot facility we have downtown, and they'll be trained to do a variety of things, sort of general work, but also they'll be able to specialize in, for example, video production or marketing and communications or exhibition design. And then during the second semester, they will be paired with community arts organizations around town who are looking for additional help and have the capacity to mentor those students. So our hope is that we're both providing some professional skills and experiences for our students in the arts, but also helping these arts organizations around Columbus to build out their capacity. And so I'm excited about that program. I think by the time we finish, we'll have somewhere between 100 and 150 students who will have passed through it, and probably in the neighborhood of 36 community arts organizations of various sizes that we'll have partnered with. Maurice Stevens, my colleague in Arts and Sciences, often talks about an arts ecosystem. And so we're very much hoping, Maurice is collaborating with me on this project, we're very much hoping that this will shore up, build out, enrich the arts ecosystem here in Columbus, and that our students will be able to find employment here if they want. And we also will be cultivating at the same time future students who see Ohio State as a path to those kinds of artistic careers that they'd like.
Well, I wonder if you could assess the state of the arts in the United States.
Wow, that's a big task. And I think it's a moment which is very pluralistic, which is to say lots of different and disparate kinds of things going on, but with an energy and excitement that you maybe only find in, I'm a big women's basketball fan, so let's say women's basketball. I have the same kind of optimism about what the arts might bring that I sort of do about women's sports in this moment. It is a place, that is to say what's going on in the arts in the United States, where I think we may be able to have conversations that would be difficult in other situations, other settings. I mean, obviously, I'm not unaware of the culture wars that are going on around us. And yet I think the arts have a kind of interest and appeal that maybe is able to cut through some of that when given the opportunity to do so. I think the arts tend to gather an audience around them. And part of the interesting thing about this pluralistic moment is I think those audiences are also increasingly coming from different places, and bringing people from different communities together has the potential, at least, to help us start to have conversations that ultimately may cover over some of the divides currently separating us. That's my, again, aspirational hope, both for the arts and for women's basketball.
I feel like I have to at least spend a little moment asking about your research specialty in the history of art. So why did you end up in the history of art and, say, not as an artist?
Yeah, so I actually did imagine once upon a time that I would be an artist, and I worked for a while even as a commercial artist in the year between my college degree and going to graduate school.
Doing what?
Oh, this and that, illustrations, caricatures, that sort of thing. Did a poster for the University of Virginia men's basketball team. I was a UVA alum, so that's where that came from. Enjoyed it tremendously, but I wasn't doing anything that was nearly so interesting to me as the art I had studied in college. So fairly quickly decided that I wanted to go back to school in art history and did that. And then I got very interested in European modernism, in the kind of optimism of those years in particular.
So early 20th century.
Early 20th century, right. And particularly abstraction and the kind of sheer inventiveness of that moment. So, yeah.
And you've written about Vasily Kandinsky, for instance. I introduced you, though, as someone who was interested in the history of art history. And you have to tell me a little bit more about what that might mean.
Yeah, so I think the discipline of art history, at least in the 20th century, I mean, when we think of art history, it's manifestly a kind of European phenomenon. It really began in the late 19th century and came of age at the beginning of the 20th. And so part of what interests me about those early 20th century European artists is that they are much more conscious, I think, of the history of their practice than artists of an earlier generation. And in some cases, I think they're actually reading and sort of thinking about the implications of some of that early art history. So the book I wrote on Kandinsky is an attempt to put him in dialogue with Hegel, and so the great German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And I sort of stumbled across that project because I was interested in, from an earlier project on Picasso, a French, let's call him philosopher, though I'm not sure that term is right, by the name of Georges Bataille. In doing research on Bataille, I discovered that he'd taken a seminar on Hegel from another, let's say, French-Russian philosopher named Alexander Kojève. Kojève taught a seminar on Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit at the École des Hautes Études in Paris in the 1930s. And Kojève also happened to be the nephew of Vasily Kandinsky. So I discovered through that chain that Kojève had actually also written an essay on his uncle's art. And so that got me interested in thinking about the circumstances of how Kojève happened to write about his uncle's art. It turns out Kandinsky asked him to. But I increasingly came to see that essay as a kind of corrective to some of Kandinsky's own theoretical writings on art. So The first half of the book is purely textual, sort of looking at this sequence of essays, beginning with Hegel's Aesthetics, moving on to an essay that Kandinsky wrote while he's sort of theorizing the invention of abstract art called Concerning the Spiritual in Art, and then Kojève's essay, which is called The Concrete Paintings of Kandinsky. And the second half of the book then is an attempt to put all of that theorizing in contact with Kandinsky's actual paintings. The argument is something like, if my earlier arguments are true, one ought to see a real dialectical development in Kandinsky's art over the course of his career. And so that was my attempt to show that one, in fact, can see the development of his paintings in that light.
Well, let me ask you, in your role as Vice Provost for the Arts, what's next on your agenda for the upcoming year, let's say?
Yeah. So again, I'm working with a company here in Columbus called Bonfire Red to make a integrated arts website. So it will have news about all of the arts, including architecture, and these projects that I'm talking about with the calling hours, the Sustainability Institute project, things that are going on at the hospital, for example. There will also be, I think I can say this, an integrated arts calendar so that if you want to find out what's going on any given Saturday, you don't have to visit the Wexner Center website, the Department of Dance, the Department of Theater, the School of Music, et cetera, that will have all that information integrated in one place. Again, we're launching with a company called Bloomberg Connects, an app. So Bloomberg Connects is one of the Bloomberg philanthropies, but they will build and maintain in perpetuity an app. I know, it's a great thing. An app that will, in this case, allow students, visitors to campus to find out about the public art we have here, to design their own kind of walking tour to see individual works. So it's exciting. So many projects I'd like to tell you about. But again, this curricular piece I'm going to turn to next. But we're also, again, working to stand up the internship program that's being funded by Mellon. We've got a performance series ongoing, building out the visiting artist program. And this year, I swear, there will be somebody collaborating with one of the science departments or social sciences. We've really already covered a lot of the ground. This curricular piece, I think, is big in thinking about how we can build the forms of thought that are distinctive to the arts into our students' experience here on campus.
Lisa Florman, thank you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Voices of Excellence is produced and recorded at The Ohio State University College of Arts and Sciences Marketing and Communications Studio. More information about the podcast and our guests can be found at go.osu.edu/voices. Voices of Excellence is produced by Doug Dangler. I'm Jen Farmer.